Think about this for a second. How often does something that looks, well, like outright cruelty actually turn out to be a cleverly disguised gift? It's kind of like a Trojan horse narrative, right? Well, in today's Explainer, we're unpacking an incredibly provocative text by an author named Zhu Feng. It's titled Benevolent Evil. And let me tell you, it's a concept that starts with a really simple observation in nature, but then it scales all the way up into this grand, highly controversial philosophy on human survival. It completely challenges our basic assumptions about what kindness actually is. So let's just get right into it.
Okay, let's dive into this central paradox. According to the text, benevolent evil is basically an action that appears cruel or just completely unsympathetic on the surface. But its ultimate purpose, and really its ultimate result, is to grant freedom, growth, and salvation to the person on the receiving end. The author frames this not as malice, not at all, but as a necessary friction. It's this idea that true kindness sometimes requires, wearing the mask of the bad guy. And to really understand how this works in practice, the author grounds the whole philosophy in a very specific, very visual story.
So the inspiration for this entire philosophy actually comes from a nature documentary. It's a scene from a show called Animal World. Picture this. High up in a tall tree, there's a bird's nest, and a mother bird is actively and seemingly ruthlessly driving her young chick right out of that nest. Now this chick is barely feathered, it's panicked, it's desperately trying to hide, and just squeeze its way back inside the safety of the nest. But the mother bird? Zero sympathy. None. She's flopping her wings, she's squawking loudly, refusing to give even an inch of ground. She relentlessly forces this clumsy little chick to the edge until, finally, the young bird is pushed out, tumbling and awkwardly spreading its wings for the very first time. On the outside, it looks absolutely heartless.
But we have to contrast that initial cruelty of the nest with what the author beautifully calls the kindness of the grass. As you can see here, the young bird lands clumsily on the ground below. But just moments later, a total transformation happens. The bird is joyful. It's hopping around, catching insects. It's suddenly discovered this broader, freer world that is actually far more comfortable than that cramped little nest. And the mother bird? She just watches calmly from a nearby branch. The author realizes in this exact moment that the mother's seemingly evil, heartless action was actually the exact catalyst for the bird's freedom. It was, quite literally, a deeply benevolent evil.
Now, the text shifts this philosophy from, avian behavior directly into practical human application. The author explains how he was so inspired by this mother bird that he decided to apply this exact method of benevolent evil to raising his own child. The foundational rule was this: he absolutely refused to do any task that his son could manage himself. No exceptions whatsoever. And the text notes a really deep irony here. Friends and acquaintances would look at the author's family and constantly envy them for having such an obedient, capable, and sensible son. But those friends had absolutely no idea that the secret behind this success was an educational method that most people would readily label as harsh or even evil.
Now, what's really interesting about this timeline is the result of this extreme tough love parenting. It created a rather striking path to independence. Instead of coddling the child, the father established really rapid milestones. By his early teenage years, 13 years old, the son is taking charge of cooking the family dinners. By 14, he's learning to drive. At 16, he isn't just driving himself to school, he's successfully competing to manage a student company. And then, when it came time for college, the father effectively pushed him out of the nest. He flat out refused to pay exorbitant elite school tuition, forcing his 18-year-old to research universities himself, select a top 100 global school, handle his own international visas, and set up his life abroad completely alone. Just like the young bird, the son soared because, well, he was forced to.
Which brings us to the real pivot point of the text. Quote, "Pure kindness ultimately harms oneself and others. Only benevolent evil can save both." Here the author transitions away from an intimate parenting anecdote and scales this philosophy all the way up. The text asserts that this principle shouldn't just be for raising kids. It argues that whether you're managing employees in a business or governing the citizens of an entire nation, leaders must adopt this benevolent evil. Pure, unadulterated kindness, according to the author's logic, is actually a trap that ultimately leads to ruin. So, when applying this to society at large, the text lays out a very specific progression for dealing with those it categorizes as ignorant or lacking in understanding. Step 1, it argues these individuals are completely unresponsive to logic and reason, even when their very lives are in danger. You literally cannot just talk them into understanding. But step 2, the text explicitly rejects extreme authoritarianism, noting that a fascist dictatorship is inhumane and totally unacceptable. Therefore, step 3, we arrive at a rather stark conclusion. The text argues that benevolent evil is the only remaining viable management and governance strategy when logic fails. The author's frustration with human behavior becomes crystal clear when examining what he views as destructive ignorance. He starts with obvious physical dangers, like children who can't swim insisting on jumping into rivers, or people wanting to touch high-voltage wires. But the text very quickly expands into highly charged ideological and social behaviors. It criticizes people who lack faith but demand freedom, individuals ignorant of Chinese culture advocating for private ownership, those who destroy nature, and those described in the text as lazy parasites and fanatics. Now, rather than just a list of complaints, the author uses these rapid-fire examples to illustrate a society acting purely on whim, a society completely oblivious to the long-term consequences, ultimately endangering both themselves and their nation.
And this is exactly where the tone of the source material shifts from a philosophical observation to absolute urgency. Because of all those examples we just ran through, the author warns that humanity is facing an immense potential disaster. The text literally states that we are standing at the edge of a precipice. The argument here is simple. We do not have the luxury of time. If leaders wait around for the ignorant masses to finally understand reason, it'll be too late, and humanity will face catastrophe. It's a direct call to action. It is time to wake up, and it requires the strong hand of benevolent evil to pull humanity back from the edge.
So the crucial point is this metric right here, 98%. According to the author's incredibly bold claim, 98% of people currently exist in a state of absolute ignorance. Returning to our initial metaphor, 98% of humanity is currently trapped inside the nest. They're just huddled together, completely unaware of the vast, freeing reality that actually exists outside their comfortable, but ultimately extremely limiting, boundaries. The text then goes on to explicitly redefine what the nest means on a global scale. It isn't just a physical home anymore. The author argues that all authoritarian systems and all religions are nests. They're places where people engage in dead-end crowding, fussing about, and essentially dreaming with their eyes closed for extended periods of time with no real prospects. Opposed to this is the sky, representing true freedom, broad horizons, and soaring into the world. The text presents a very stark binary choice for us: stay in the nest and face a dead end, or be forced out into the sky to truly live.
Finally, the text introduces the mechanism for this necessary push. The author positions a movement or concept called Lifechanyuan as the metaphorical big bird. Just like the mother bird in that nature documentary, Lifechanyuan is described as being determined to drive the young birds, meaning humanity, out of their societal and ideological nests. The text asserts that you can only truly understand the benevolent evil of Lifechanyuan once you've been forced out of your comfort zone and find yourself surviving and thriving in the open sky. It is presented as a necessary, albeit forceful, salvation.
Which brings us to the lingering question the author poses directly to the reader at the very end of the text: don't you want to fly freely like the young bird? It really makes you think, doesn't it? Does true salvation actually require a push that we might initially perceive as evil? It's an incredibly complex boundary between cruelty, kindness, and ultimate freedom. And I think that is a deeply provocative thought to leave you with today.